Her name was destroyed in a single night. One innocent moment, sheltering from a storm, became the scandal that would ruin Clara Whitmore's life in 1878 Arizona. With whispers turning to shouts and her father demanding she flee, Clara faced an impossible choice: abandon everything she loved or marry a stranger. The cowboy who appeared at her door offered salvation wrapped in cold convenience. But what began as a bargain to save her reputation would become something neither of them expected. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled. The rain had stopped 3 hours ago, but the damage was already done. Clara Whitmore stood in the middle of Main Street, her hands trembling at her sides, staring at the faces that had once smiled at her with warmth and now looked away with something far worse than contempt. Pity mixed with judgment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street, and in those shadows, Clara could feel the weight of every whispered word, every sideways glance, every pursed lip that had greeted her since dawn. "Poor thing," she heard Mrs. Henderson murmur to Mrs. Campbell outside the millinery shop. "Caught alone with a man during that terrible storm, in the old schoolhouse of all places." "Her father must be devastated," Mrs. Campbell replied, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Such a good man, Dr. Whitmore, and to have his daughter's reputation destroyed like this." Clara's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, that nothing had happened, that she'd simply taken shelter from the storm in the abandoned schoolhouse while returning from the Mitchells' farm where she'd been helping deliver a baby. The James Porter had been there too, yes, but only because he'd also sought refuge from the rain. They hadn't even spoken more than a few words. But she knew the truth didn't matter. Not in a town like Blessing Creek, where reputation was currency and scandal was entertainment. She held her head high and walked toward the general store, forcing herself not to run, not to show weakness. But with each step, she felt the stares like hot brands against her skin. The bell above the door chimed as she entered Murphy's General Store, and the conversation inside died instantly. 3 women stood near the fabric counter, women who had once invited her to quilting circles and church socials. Now they looked at her as if she carried a contagious disease. "Miss Whitmore," Mr. Murphy said from behind the counter, his voice carefully neutral. "What can I do for you?" "I need 2 pounds of flour, a tin of coffee, and sugar," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She placed her basket on the counter and met his eyes directly, daring him to look away. He nodded and began gathering her items, moving with uncomfortable speed, clearly eager to complete the transaction and have her leave. The 3 women by the fabric whispered among themselves, not even bothering to lower their voices. "Shameless!" one of them hissed. "Showing her face in public after what happened." "I heard they were in there for over an hour," another added. "Alone." "Well, what else could they have been doing all that time?" Clara's hands clenched into fists. She turned slowly to face them, her green eyes blazing. "We were staying dry," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the store like a knife, "during a storm that nearly flooded the creek and tore the roof off the Anderson barn. Perhaps you remember it. Or were you too busy inventing stories to notice the weather?" The women gasped, their faces flushing with indignation. Mrs. Fletcher, the oldest of the 3, drew herself up to her full height. "How dare you speak to us in that tone? You should be begging forgiveness, not making excuses for your behavior." "Begging forgiveness for what?" Clara demanded, stepping toward them. "For being caught in a storm, for helping Mrs. Mitchell bring her son into this world, for having the misfortune of seeking shelter in the same building as a man I barely know." "Young lady," Mr. Murphy interrupted, his voice sharp, "I think you'd best take your purchases and go." Clara turned back to him, seeing the discomfort and disapproval in his weathered face. This man had known her since she was a child. He'd given her peppermint sticks when she came to the store with her father. Now he looked at her as if she were a stranger, and an unwelcome one at that. "Of course," she said quietly, the fight suddenly draining out of her. She placed her coins on the counter and gathered her items. "Good day, Mr. Murphy." She walked out of the store with her spine straight and her chin up, but the moment the door closed behind her, she felt the tears threatening. She blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry. Not here, not where they could see. "Clara!" She turned to see her father hurrying toward her, his medical bag in hand, his face lined with worry. Dr. Samuel Whitmore was a respected man in Blessing Creek, one of the few educated men in town, a healer who'd saved countless lives. But even his reputation couldn't protect his daughter from the scandal that had engulfed her. "Papa," she said, trying to smile, "I was just getting some supplies for—" "Come home," he said, taking her arm gently. "Please, Clara, come home." They walked together in silence, Clara acutely aware of the eyes following them. Her father's grip on her arm was protective, almost desperate, and when they finally reached their small house at the edge of town, he closed the door behind them with a heavy sigh. "Clara," he said, turning to face her. His kind eyes were filled with pain. "We need to talk." "Papa, I know what you're going to say, and You can't stay here," he interrupted, his voice breaking slightly. "Clara, you can't. This town. They've made up their minds. The damage is done." Clara set her basket down carefully, feeling her world tilting. "What are you saying?" "I have a colleague in San Francisco," her father continued, speaking quickly as if afraid he'd lose his courage. "Dr. Harrison, he's agreed to take you on as his assistant. You'd have work, lodging, a fresh start where no one knows about this." "San Francisco?" Claire repeated, the word foreign on her tongue. "Papa, that's over 1,000 miles away. I can't just leave." "You must," he said firmly. "Clara, do you understand what this means? No decent man in this town will marry you now. No respectable family will hire you. You'll be ostracized, whispered about for the rest of your life. This is your chance to start over, to build a new life where people will judge you on your merits, not on malicious gossip." Clara sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "I won't leave you," she said finally. "Papa, you're all I have. Since Mama died, it's been just us. I won't abandon you to live alone." "I'm asking you to," her father said, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands. "Clara, I love you more than anything in this world. Your happiness, your future, that's all that matters to me. And your future is not here. Not anymore." Before Clara could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Father and daughter exchanged glances. Visitors had been scarce since the scandal broke 2 days ago. Dr. Whitmore opened the door, and Clara heard his sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Hale," her father said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is unexpected." Clara stood quickly, smoothing her skirts. Rowan Hale. Even the name carried weight in Blessing Creek. He owned the largest ranch in the territory, employed half the men in town, and was known as a fair but hard man who kept to himself. Claire had seen him perhaps a dozen times in her life, always from a distance. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His wife had died in childbirth 3 years ago, and rumor said he'd never quite recovered from the loss. "Dr. Whitmore," Rowan said, his voice deep and gravelly. "I apologize for the intrusion. I was hoping to speak with your daughter, with both of you, actually." Clara's father stepped aside, allowing Rowan to enter. The cowboy removed his hat as he crossed the threshold, and for the first time Clara saw him up close. He was perhaps 35, with weather-worn features and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a hardness to him, but also a strange vulnerability she hadn't expected. "Mr. Hale," Clara said, finding her voice. "What can we do for you?" Rowan turned those gray eyes on her, and she felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly, "I've come with a proposition, one that I believe could benefit us both." "I don't understand," Clara said, glancing at her father, who looked equally confused. Rowan took a breath, and Clara realized with shock that the seemingly unshakable rancher was nervous. "I'll speak plainly," he said. "I've heard about your situation. The whole town has. And I know that your reputation has been damaged through no fault of your own." Clara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Mr. Hale, I don't see what business this is of—" "I'm in need of a wife," Rowan interrupted, his words falling like stones into still water. "Or rather, my niece is in need of a mother." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "My brother died 6 months ago," Rowan continued, his voice carefully controlled. "His daughter, Ella, is 5 years old. She's living with me now, but she deserves a woman's care, a mother's care." and you need a way to restore your reputation and remain in this territory. I'm proposing a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement that would solve both our problems." "A business arrangement," Clara repeated slowly, her mind struggling to process his words. "You're asking me to marry you." "I'm offering you a way out of an impossible situation," Rowan corrected. "You'd have a home, respectability, security, and Ella would have someone to care for her properly. This isn't a love match, Miss Whitmore. I'm not offering romance or courtship. I'm offering a practical solution to a difficult problem." Clara felt her father's hand on her shoulder. "Mr. Hale," Dr. Whitmore said carefully, "this is quite sudden. Surely Clara needs time to consider." "Time is what she doesn't have," Rowan said bluntly. "Every day that passes, the gossip gets worse. The damage deepens. I'm leaving for the ranch tomorrow at first light. If Miss Whitmore agrees, we could be married tomorrow morning before I go. She'd come with me as my wife, and this whole ugly business would be behind her." "Behind me?" Clara found her voice again, anger flaring hot in her chest. "Mr. Hale, a marriage won't erase what people are saying. It won't change their minds." "No," Rowan agreed, "but it will give them something else to talk about. And more importantly, it will give you a legitimate reason to hold your head high. As Mrs. Rowan Hale, you'd be one of the most respected women in this territory. No one would dare speak against you, not if they wanted to keep my business." The calculated coldness of his words should have offended her, but instead, Clara found herself considering them. He was right. As the wife of Rowan Hale, she'd have protection, status, security, but at what cost? "And what would you expect from this arrangement?" she asked carefully. Rowan met her gaze steadily. "I'd expect you to care for Ella, to make my house a home again, to fulfill the duties of a ranch wife. I'd provide for you, protect you, and treat you with respect. But I won't. This is a marriage of convenience, Miss Whitmore. I'm not looking for love or intimate relations. My heart was buried with my wife. I'm simply looking for someone to help me raise my niece." Clara's father made a sound of protest. "Mr. Hale, surely you understand how inappropriate—" "Papa," Clara interrupted softly. She looked at Rowan, seeing the desperation hidden behind his stoic expression. He needed help just as much as she needed an escape. And perhaps that made them perfect for each other, two desperate people making a desperate bargain. But she wouldn't be a doormat. If she was going to do this, it would be on her terms. "If I were to agree," she said slowly, watching Rowan's face carefully, "I would have conditions." Something flickered in those gray eyes. "I'm listening." "First, I would need my own space, my own room. I won't be treated as an obligation you're forced to endure." "Agreed," Rowan said without hesitation. "Second, I would want the freedom to make decisions regarding the household and Ella's care without interference. I won't be undermined or second-guessed at every turn." "Agreed." "Third," Claire continued, her heart pounding, "this marriage may be one of convenience, but I will not be treated as a servant or an employee. I would be your wife in name and in standing. I expect respect, honesty, and basic courtesy. Can you promise me that?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating eyes. Then slowly he nodded. "I can promise you that. But I have one condition of my own." "Which is?" "Whatever happens between us, whatever this marriage becomes or doesn't become, Ella comes first. She's been through hell losing her parents. I won't have her hurt again. If you agree to this, you're committing to her, not just to me. Can you promise me that?" Clara thought of the frightened little girl who must be living at the Hale Ranch, motherless and grieving. She thought of her own mother, who had died when Clara was 12, leaving a hole that had never quite filled. She thought of how desperately she had needed someone, anyone, to see her pain and care about it. "I can promise you that," she said quietly. Rowan extended his hand. "Then we have an agreement." Clara looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, offering her salvation and imprisonment in equal measure. She looked at her father, who seemed torn between relief and concern. She thought about San Francisco, about running away to a city where she knew no one, starting over as if the first 22 years of her life had never happened. Then she thought about staying here, watching the town she loved turn on her completely, becoming a cautionary tale mothers told their daughters. She took Rowan's hand. His grip was firm and warm, and somehow in that moment it felt like the only solid thing in a world that had tilted off its axis. "We have an agreement," she echoed. "I'll speak to Pastor Williams tonight," Rowan said, releasing her hand. "We can be married tomorrow morning at dawn. Pack what you need, Miss Whitmore. I'll send a wagon for your belongings next week." "Dawn?" Clara's father protested. "Mr. Hale, surely we can wait a few days. Give Clara time to—" "Every day we wait is another day the gossip spreads," Rowan said, not unkindly. "And I need to get back to the ranch. Ella's been staying with my foreman's wife, but I don't like being away from her for long. She doesn't do well when I'm gone." Clara felt a pang of sympathy for the frightened child. "I understand," she said. "I'll be ready." Rowan nodded, putting his hat back on. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore. I'll see you at the church at dawn." He turned to her father. "Dr. Whitmore, I know this isn't the marriage you envisioned for your daughter, but I give you my word. I'll take care of her." After Rowan left, Clara and her father sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Dr. Whitmore spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. "Are you certain about this, Clara? Once it's done, there's no going back." "I'm certain that staying here without protection is impossible," Clara replied. "And I'm certain that running away to San Francisco would break both our hearts. This way I'm still in Arizona. I'm still close enough to visit, and I'm married to a man who, by all accounts, is honorable and fair. But Clara, a marriage without love, would you prefer I marry someone who claims to love me but treats me poorly?" Clara asked gently. "Papa, at least with Mr. Hale, I know exactly what I'm getting. Honesty, respect, and security. Many women marry for far less." Her father pulled her into his arms, and Clara finally let herself cry. She cried for the life she'd imagined, for the scandal that had stolen her choices, for the fear of the unknown that awaited her at the Hale Ranch. But she also cried with relief, because at least now she had a path forward, even if it wasn't the one she'd chosen. That night, Clara packed her belongings by candlelight. She carefully folded her dresses, wrapped her mother's jewelry in soft cloth, packed her books and her sewing kit and the little trinkets that had made up her life. As she worked, she tried to imagine what the Hale Ranch would be like, what Ella would be like, what her life as Rowan Hale's wife would entail. Sleep was impossible. Clara lay in bed watching the shadows shift across her ceiling, listening to her father moving restlessly in his room down the hall. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Rowan Hale, wife of a man she didn't know, stepmother to a child she'd never met, mistress of a ranch she'd never seen. When the first gray light of dawn crept through her window, Clara rose and dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue calico that her mother had helped her make years ago. She braided her auburn hair and pinned it up, studying her reflection in the mirror. She looked calm, composed, nothing like the terrified girl she felt like inside. "Clara?" Her father knocked softly. "It's time." They walked to the church together through the empty streets. Pastor Williams was waiting on the steps, looking uncomfortable but resolved, and beside him stood Rowan Hale, dressed in a clean black suit that made him look even more imposing than usual. "Miss Whitmore," Rowan greeted her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Claire replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "There's still time to change your mind," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "If you're having second thoughts—" "Are you?" Claire interrupted. "No." "Then neither am I." Something that might have been respect flickered across Rowan's face. He offered her his arm, and together they walked into the church. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Pastor Williams seemed eager to get through it quickly, uncomfortable with the circumstances of this sudden marriage. Clara spoke her vows clearly, feeling as if she were outside her own body, watching someone else promise to love, honor, and cherish a stranger. When Rowan slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, Clara felt the weight of it like a shackle and a lifeline at once. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Williams said, his voice uncertain. Rowan hesitated, then leaned in and pressed a quick, chaste kiss to Clara's cheek. It was over in a heartbeat, but Clara felt the unexpected gentleness of it like a shock. "Congratulations," Pastor Williams said without enthusiasm. "You're now man and wife." Clara's father embraced her tightly, whispering, "Be happy, my darling girl. Please, just be happy." I'll try, Papa, she promised, her throat tight with unshed tears. Then Rowan was leading her outside where a wagon waited, loaded with her trunks and provisions for the journey. As Clara climbed onto the seat beside her new husband, she saw curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. By noon, everyone in Blessing Creek would know that ruined Clara Whitmore had married Rowan Hale. Rowan clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. As they left town, Clara turned for one last look at Blessing Creek, at the life she'd known, the dreams she'd had, the person she'd been before a rainstorm changed everything. Regrets? Rowan asked, his eyes on the road. No, Clara said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Just saying goodbye. They rode in silence for the first hour, the wagon creaking rhythmically, the Arizona landscape rolling past in shades of gold and red under the climbing sun. Finally, Rowan spoke. The ranch is about 3 hours from here. It's remote. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. We run cattle and horses, employ about 20 men during busy seasons. The house it's big. Too big for just Ella and me. It's been empty since my wife died. Clara processed this information. Tell me about Ella, she said. Rowan's hands tightened on the reins. She's small for her age, quiet. She doesn't talk much since her parents died. My brother and his wife were killed in a fire. Ella was at a neighbor's house. She saw the smoke, understood what had happened. She's been withdrawn since then, scared of everything. Poor child, Clara murmured, her heart aching for the little girl. I don't know how to reach her, Rowan admitted, and the confession seemed to cost him. I try, but I'm not good with children. I don't know how to make her feel safe. Clara turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. This hard, stoic man was terrified that he was failing the one person who needed him most. I'll do my best, Clara said softly. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I promise I'll try. Rowan nodded, something easing in his expression. That's all I ask. As they traveled deeper into ranch country, the landscape changed. Rolling hills gave way to vast stretches of grassland dotted with cattle. In the distance, mountains rose blue and purple against the sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made Clara's breath catch. There, Rowan said, pointing ahead. That's home. Clara looked and saw the ranch spreading out before them, a large house of timber and stone surrounded by barns, corrals, and outbuildings. It was impressive and intimidating in equal measure, and Clara felt her stomach clench with nerves. As they drew closer, she saw a small figure standing on the porch beside an older woman. Even from a distance, Clara could sense the child's fear and uncertainty. Ella. Rowan brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down, then reached up to help Clara. His hands on her waist were impersonal but steady, and when her feet touched the ground, Clara found herself standing in front of what would now be her home. Clara, Rowan said, his voice formal, this is Mrs. Jensen, my foreman's wife. She's been looking after Ella. Mrs. Jensen, this is my wife, Clara. Mrs. Jensen's eyebrows shot up, but she recovered quickly. Mrs. Hale, she said with a slight curtsy. What a surprise! Mr. Hale didn't mention he was getting married. It was rather sudden, Clara said, forcing a smile. Then she looked down at the little girl clinging to Mrs. Jensen's skirts. Ella was tiny, with dark curls and eyes that were far too old for her young face. Those eyes watched Clara with a mixture of fear and desperate hope that broke Clara's heart. Clara knelt down slowly, bringing herself to Ella's level. Hello, Ella, she said gently. My name is Clara. I'm very pleased to meet you. Ella said nothing, just pressed closer to Mrs. Jensen. Your uncle has told me so much about you, Clara continued softly. I was hoping we could be friends. Would you like that? Still no response. But Ella's eyes flickered with something, curiosity, perhaps, or longing. Clara decided not to push. The child would come to her in her own time. Well, Mrs. Jensen said, breaking the tension, I should be getting home. My husband will be wondering where I've gotten to. She gently extracted herself from Ella's grip. You be good for your uncle and his new wife, Ella. And Mrs. Hale, if you need anything at all, we're just over the rise in the foreman's house. After Mrs. Jensen left, the three of them stood in awkward silence. Clara looked at Rowan, who looked at Ella, who stared at the ground. Right, Rowan said finally. Clara, let me show you the house. Ella, come along. The interior of the ranch house was as impressive as the exterior. Large rooms with high ceilings, sturdy furniture, and windows that let in floods of golden light. But Clara immediately saw what Rowan had meant about it being empty. The house was clean but lifeless, lacking the small touches that made a house a home. Your room is upstairs, Rowan said, leading the way. I've taken the master bedroom, and Ella's room is across the hall from mine. I thought you might want the room at the end of the hall. It has the best light. He opened a door, and Clara stepped into what would be her sanctuary. It was a good-sized room with a large window overlooking the grasslands, a sturdy bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk. It was simple, but comfortable. It's perfect, Clara said. Thank you. Rowan nodded, seeming relieved. I'll bring your trunks up. Take some time to settle in. Supper is usually at 6. I'll give you some space. After he left, Clara sank onto the bed and let out a long breath. She'd done it. She'd married a stranger and come to live in a house in the middle of nowhere with a traumatized child and a man who'd been clear he wanted nothing but practical convenience from her. What had she gotten herself into? A small sound made her look up. Ella stood in the doorway, watching her with those haunting eyes. Hello again, Clara said softly. Did you want to come in? Ella didn't move, but she didn't leave either. You know, Clara said, I'm a little scared right now. This is all very new to me. Do you ever feel scared? Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ella nodded. Clara's heart squeezed. Me too, she admitted. It's scary when everything changes, isn't it? Another tiny nod. Well, Clara said, I suppose we'll have to be brave together. Would that be all right? You and me being brave together? Ella's lips trembled slightly, and for a moment Clara thought she might speak. Instead, the little girl turned and ran down the hall, her footsteps echoing. Clara sighed but didn't chase her. It was a start, a small, fragile start, but a start nonetheless. As the afternoon sun slanted through her window, Clara unpacked her belongings, transforming the empty room into her space. She placed her mother's picture on the desk, hung her dresses in the wardrobe, arranged her books on the shelf. With each item she placed, she felt a little more grounded, a little more real. This was her life now. For better or worse, she was Clara Hale, wife to a cowboy, stepmother to a frightened child, mistress of a lonely ranch in the Arizona Territory. She had no idea what the future held. But as she looked out her window at the vast, beautiful landscape stretching to the horizon, Clara made herself a promise. She would not just survive this strange new life. She would make it count. The first week at the Hale Ranch passed in a blur of adjustment, careful navigation. Clara woke each morning before dawn to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle, pulled on her work dress, and descended to a kitchen that felt cavernous and cold despite the warmth from the cast-iron stove. Rowan was always gone by the time she came downstairs, already out on the range with his men. He left early and returned late, their interactions limited to stilted dinners where conversation died before it could begin. Clara would serve the meal, Ella would push food around her plate in silence, and Rowan would eat quickly before excusing himself to his study to review accounts and ranch business. It was a lonely existence, but Clara threw herself into work. The house had been neglected, not dirty exactly, but lacking the attention to detail that made a place feel cared for. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, aired out rooms that smelled of dust and disuse. She rearranged furniture to catch better light, hung curtains she found stored in trunks, and slowly began to breathe life back into the empty spaces. Ella watched her constantly, but always from a distance. The little girl was like a ghost, appearing in doorways and disappearing the moment Clara looked directly at her. Clara didn't push, just talked to her gently whenever she saw her, narrating her tasks like a story. I'm baking bread today, Ella. My mother taught me when I was about your age. The secret is in the kneading. You have to fold it just right, see? Would you like to help next time? No response, just those wide, watchful eyes before Ella vanished again. On the fourth day, Clara ventured to the garden behind the house and found it overrun with weeds, the soil dry and neglected. She remembered what Rowan had said, that his wife had died 3 years ago. This garden had probably been hers, Clara realized, and after her death, no one had tended it. Clara spent the afternoon on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds and turning soil. She found the remnants of what had once been a beautiful space. Rose bushes struggling to survive, herb plants choked by invasive growth, a small vegetable patch that had long since gone to seed. As she worked, she felt a strange connection to the woman who had lived here before her, who had loved this garden, who had died too young and left everything behind. "What are you doing?" Clara jerked in surprise, turning to find Ella standing a few feet away. It was the first time the child had spoken to her directly, and Clara's heart leaped. "I'm trying to save the garden," Clara said carefully, afraid that any sudden movement or wrong word would send Ella running. "It's very sick right now, but I think if we take care of it, it could be beautiful again. What do you think?" Ella moved closer, her small face serious as she examined the tangled mess. "Mama liked gardens," she said quietly. "She used to make me flower crowns." Clara's throat tightened. "Your mama sounds like she was very special." "She died in the fire," Ella said, her voice flat, emotionless. "Papa too. I saw the smoke. Mrs. Jensen wouldn't let me go help them." "Oh, sweetheart," Clara breathed, setting down her trowel. "Mrs. Jensen was trying to keep you safe." "But they burned up," Ella said, and the horror in those simple words made Clara want to weep. "They burned up and I didn't help them." Clara opened her arms, not grabbing or reaching, just offering. For a long moment, Ella stood frozen. Then, like a dam breaking, she threw herself into Clara's embrace, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too large for such a tiny person to contain. Clara held her, rocking gently, murmuring nonsense words of comfort while the child cried out months of grief and trauma and guilt that no 5-year-old should ever have to carry. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened, and still Ella cried, clinging to Clara as if she were a lifeline in a storm-tossed sea. When the sobs finally subsided to hiccups, Clara gently wiped Ella's tear-stained face with the hem of her apron. "Listen to me," she said softly but firmly. "What happened to your mama and papa was not your fault. Do you understand? There was nothing you could have done, nothing. Mrs. Jensen kept you safe because that's what your mama and papa would have wanted. They would want you to live and grow and be happy." "I don't remember how to be happy," Ella whispered. "Then we'll figure it out together," Clara promised. "You and me. What do you say?" Ella nodded against Clara's shoulder, and something fundamental shifted between them in that moment. When they finally went back into the house, Ella's small hand was tucked trustingly in Clara's, and Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle over her like a mantle. That evening, when Rowan came in for supper, he stopped short in the doorway. Ella was setting the table, actually helping instead of just watching, and Clara was teaching her how to fold napkins properly. "Like this?" Ella asked, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Perfect," Clara said warmly. "You're a natural." Rowan's eyes met Clara's over Ella's head, and the gratitude and wonder in his expression made Clara's breath catch. He'd been carrying this burden alone for so long, watching his niece retreat further into herself, helpless to reach her. And now, after just 4 days, something had changed. "Smells good," Rowan said, hanging his hat on the hook by the door. "What are we having?" "Chicken and dumplings," Clara replied. "And Ella helped me make biscuits this afternoon. She's quite talented." A tiny smile flickered across Ella's face, the first smile Clara had seen from her. It was small and tentative, but it was there, and from the way Rowan's entire face softened, Clara knew he'd noticed too. Dinner that night was different. Ella actually ate, encouraged by Clara's gentle praise and Rowan's awkward but sincere compliments. The conversation was still stilted, but there were moments, small ones, where they almost felt like a family instead of 3 strangers forced together by circumstance. After Ella was put to bed, Clara found Rowan in his study, staring at papers he clearly wasn't reading. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "I wanted to thank you," Rowan said before she could speak, "for whatever you did today. I haven't seen Ella smile in 6 months." "She talked about her parents," Clara said, stepping into the room. "She's been carrying terrible guilt, thinking she should have saved them somehow. She needed to cry, to let it out. She's still grieving, Rowan. She will be for a long time. But at least now she's not carrying it alone." Rowan stood, running a hand through his dark hair. "I should have known. I should have helped her through it." "You did help her," Clara said gently. "You brought her here, gave her a home, kept her safe. You brought me here. Sometimes grief just needs time and the right person to witness it. Still, Rowan said, moving to the window, I'm grateful. You're good with her. Better than I expected. What did you expect? Clara asked, more curious than offended. Rowan turned to face her, and in the lamplight his features seemed less harsh, more human. Honestly? I didn't know. I knew you helped your father sometimes, that you were good with people, but this… Clara, what you're doing for Ella, it's more than I had any right to ask for. You didn't ask for my heart, Clara said. But she has it anyway. Something complicated crossed Rowan's face. About our arrangement, are you comfortable here? Is the room adequate? Do you need anything? It was the most personal conversation they'd had since the wedding, and Clara found herself studying him carefully. He was trying, she realized. In his gruff, awkward way, he was trying to make sure she was cared for. The room is perfect, Clara said. The house is beautiful. And your men have been respectful. I have everything I need. Good. That's good. Rowan cleared his throat. I've been thinking. There's a piano in the front parlor. It was my wife's. No one's played it since she died. If you play, or if you think Ella might want to learn… I'd love to play it, Clara said, surprised and touched. And I think music might be good for Ella. Give her a way to express feelings she can't put into words. Rowan nodded, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence, the evening sounds of the ranch drifting through the open window. Then Rowan spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. I'll be away for a few days next week. There's a cattle auction in Prescott I need to attend. Will you be all right here with Ella? My foreman Jensen will be around if you need anything. We'll be fine, Clara assured him. Take whatever time you need. After Clara left, Rowan remained at the window, watching her shadow pass across the courtyard as she returned to the main house. When he'd proposed this arrangement, he'd been thinking only of Ella, of finding someone, anyone, to help him care for his traumatized niece. He'd chosen Clara because she needed an escape, and he needed help, and it had seemed like a fair trade. He hadn't expected her to be so competent, so gentle, so naturally maternal with Ella. He hadn't expected to find himself listening for her footsteps in the morning, or looking forward to dinner just to hear her voice. And he certainly hadn't expected the complicated tangle of feelings that stirred in his chest when she smiled at his niece with such genuine affection. This was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement, nothing more. But as Rowan extinguished the lamp and made his way to his empty bedroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd underestimated Clara Whitmore. Clara Hale, he corrected himself, and the effect she would have on his carefully controlled life. The following week, true to his word, Rowan left for Prescott. Clara woke to find him already gone. A brief note on the kitchen table explaining he'd be back in 4 days, and to send for Jensen if there were any problems. Clara folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket, telling herself the small pang of disappointment she felt was ridiculous. This was exactly the arrangement she'd agreed to, a marriage of convenience with minimal interaction. She should be relieved to have some space, some time to settle into the ranch without Rowan's intense presence filling every room. Is Uncle Rowan gone? Ella asked, appearing in the doorway in her nightgown, her dark curls tangled from sleep. He had to go to Prescott for business, Clara explained, but he'll be back in a few days. In the meantime, it's just you and me. What should we do first? Ella considered this seriously. Can we work on the garden? Absolutely, but first breakfast. How about pancakes? Over the next 3 days, Clara and Ella fell into an easy rhythm. They worked in the garden each morning, rescuing plants and planning what they'd grow in the spring. They baked bread and made preserves from the wild berries Ella showed her near the creek. Clara played the piano while Ella sat beside her, pressing random keys and giggling at the sounds. They read stories before bed, and Ella began sleeping through the night without the nightmares that had plagued her before. On the third evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ella leaned against Clara's side with a contentment that made Clara's heart ache. "Clara?" Ella said quietly. "Can I call you Mama?" Clara's breath caught. She thought of Ella's real mother, dead in a fire, and wondered what that woman would want for her daughter. Would she be angry that someone was taking her place? Or would she be grateful that Ella had found someone to love her? What about your mama? Clara asked gently. The one who gave birth to you? I'll always remember her, Ella said. But she's gone. And you're here. And you take care of me like a mama does. So, can I? Clara pulled the little girl into her lap, burying her face in those dark curls. Yes, she whispered. Yes, sweetheart. I would be honored if you called me Mama. Ella wrapped her arms around Clara's neck and held on tight, and Clara felt something inside her that had been closed off for weeks finally open. She'd come to this ranch to save her reputation, to escape scandal, to fulfill a business arrangement with a stranger. But somewhere along the way, without realizing it, she'd found something she hadn't known she was looking for: purpose, belonging, and a love so fierce it startled her with its intensity. The next afternoon, Rowan returned. Clara heard the horses before she saw them, and she wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron as she stepped onto the porch. Rowan was dusty and tired, but when he saw Clara standing there with Ella beside her, something in his expression softened. "Welcome home," Clara called, and the words felt strange and right at the same time. Rowan dismounted, and immediately Ella ran to him, chattering excitedly about everything they'd done while he was away. As Clara watched him lift his niece into his arms, listening with genuine interest to her stories, she saw a different side of him, the gentleness hidden beneath the gruff exterior, the devotion that drove every decision he made. "Sounds like you kept busy," Rowan said, setting Ella down. His eyes met Clara's. "No problems?" "None at all," Clara replied. "Though I did reorganize the pantry. I hope you don't mind." "Mind? Clara, you can do whatever you want with the house. It's your home now." "Your home?" The words resonated through Clara, settling into a place she hadn't known was empty. This was her home, not the house in Blessing Creek where she'd grown up, not some imaginary future she'd once dreamed of. This ranch, this house, this strange little family, this was home. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere was different again. Ella talked non-stop, telling Rowan every detail of their days together. Rowan listened, asking questions, and occasionally his eyes would find Clara's across the table with an expression she couldn't quite read. After Ella was in bed, Clara was cleaning up the kitchen when Rowan appeared in the doorway. "Need any help?" he asked. Clara nearly dropped the plate she was washing. In 2 weeks of marriage, Rowan had never offered to help with household tasks. Yes, actually, you could dry these?" They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Rowan spoke. "She called you Mama today. Ella. When I was putting her to bed, she said, 'Mama made the best biscuits.' She meant you." Clara kept her eyes on the soapy water. "She asked if she could call me that. I hope you don't mind. I know it's only been 2 weeks, and I'm not trying to replace her real mother." "Clara," Rowan interrupted gently. "I don't mind. I think it's exactly what she needs, what we both need." Clara looked up at him, and in the warm glow of the kitchen lamps, she saw vulnerability in his storm-gray eyes. This man who seemed so strong, so self-sufficient, was admitting he needed help, that he needed her. "The auction went well," Rowan continued, hanging up the dish towel. "I got a good price for the cattle, made some contacts for spring sales. We should have a comfortable winter." "That's wonderful," Clara said, meaning it. "Clara, Rowan hesitated, then pushed forward. "I know this isn't what you imagined when you thought about marriage. I know this isn't a love match, but I want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing here. For Ella. For the house. For all of it." "You're welcome," Clara said softly. "Rowan, I know we married for practical reasons, but that doesn't mean we can't make it work. That doesn't mean we can't build something good here." "Is it good for you?" Rowan asked suddenly. "Are you happy here, or do you regret—" "I don't regret it," Clara said firmly. "I won't lie and say everything is perfect or that I don't miss certain things about my old life. But I don't regret coming here. Ella alone makes it worthwhile." Rowan nodded slowly, but Clara thought she saw something like disappointment flicker across his face. Had he wanted her to mention him too? To say that he made it worthwhile? Before she could say anything else, Rowan straightened. "Well, I should let you get some rest. Thank you again. For everything. He left quickly, and Clara stood alone in the kitchen, wondering what had just happened. There had been something in that conversation, some undercurrent she couldn't quite identify. It felt like they'd been dancing around words neither of them was ready to say. As autumn deepened into early winter, life at the ranch settled into a pattern. Clara continued transforming the house, adding small touches that made it feel lived in and loved. She cooked hearty meals that the ranch hands raved about, tended to the garden even as the weather cooled, and spent hours with Ella reading, playing, and slowly healing the wounds that loss had carved into the child's heart. And Rowan. Rowan was changing too. He came home earlier now, eager to hear about their day. He taught Ella to ride on a gentle mare, with Clara watching anxiously from the fence. He fixed things around the house without being asked, anticipating needs before Clara even voiced them. He spoke more at dinner, sharing stories about the ranch, asking Clara's opinions on matters she never expected him to consult her about. They were becoming friends, Clara realized with some surprise. This man she'd married out of desperation, this stranger who'd offered her a way out of an impossible situation, she actually liked him. She liked his dry humor and his unexpected kindness. She liked the way he was patient with Ella and fair with his men. She liked the rare smiles that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. And sometimes, when she caught him looking at her across the dinner table, or when their hands accidentally brushed as they both reached for something, she felt a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with friendship and everything to do with the fact that he was her husband, and she was starting to wish their marriage was more than just a convenient arrangement. But she kept those feelings locked away. Rowan had been clear from the beginning. This was a business arrangement. His heart was buried with his first wife. He didn't want love or romance or anything beyond what they already had. And Clara told herself she was content with that, even as her heart began to whisper otherwise. One particularly cold evening in late November, a fierce storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the sky like rifle shots, and lightning illuminated the ranch in stark flashes. Clara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard Ella's terrified screams. She ran to find the child in the hallway, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. "Fire!" Ella sobbed. "I smell smoke. The fire's coming." There was no smoke, no fire. But Clara understood immediately. The storm had triggered Ella's memories of the night her parents died. Clara dropped to her knees and pulled Ella into her arms. "Sweetheart, there's no fire. You're safe. I promise you're safe." But Ella was beyond hearing, locked in the grip of a panic attack, her small body rigid with terror. Clara held her, rocking and murmuring reassurances, but nothing seemed to help. Then Rowan was there, dripping wet from being caught in the rain, his face etched with concern. "What happened?" "The storm," Clara said quickly. "It triggered memories." Without hesitation, Rowan knelt beside them and gathered both Ella and Clara into his strong arms. "Ella," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Look at me. Open your eyes and look at me." Slowly Ella's eyes opened, wild and unseen. "You're at the ranch," Rowan continued steadily. "You're with me and Clara. There's no fire. The thunder is just noise. It can't hurt you. The lightning can't hurt you. We're all safe inside. Can you hear the rain on the roof? That means the land is getting water. That's good. Not scary. Listen to the rain, Ella. Just listen." Gradually, Ella's breathing slowed. She sagged against Rowan, exhausted from the panic. Clara stroked her hair, and Rowan held them both, the three of them huddled together on the floor while the storm raged outside. "I'm sorry," Ella whispered eventually. "I'm sorry I got scared." "You never have to apologize for being scared," Rowan said firmly. "Never. Do you hear me? Fear is just your body trying to keep you safe. There's no shame in it." "Uncle Rowan's right," Clara added softly. "And we'll always be here when you're scared. Always. You're not alone anymore, Ella. You'll never be alone again." Ella nodded against Rowan's chest, and they stayed there until the child fell asleep, worn out from fear and relief. Rowan carefully lifted her and carried her to bed, with Clara following. Together they tucked her in, and Clara sat beside the bed while Rowan stood in the doorway, neither of them willing to leave her alone. "She'll be all right," Clara said quietly. "It'll take time, but she'll heal." "Because of you," Rowan said. "Clara, I don't know what we would have done without you. Before you came, Ella was slipping away from me. I could feel it, and now she's coming back." Clara looked up at him, seeing the raw emotion in his face. "You were already helping her, Rowan. You gave her stability and safety. I just gave her permission to feel again." Rowan crossed the room and sat in the chair beside Clara's. They stayed there together, watching Ella sleep, listening to the storm slowly fade, and somewhere in that quiet vigil, something shifted between them. Clara became aware of Rowan's presence in a way she hadn't before. The warmth of him, the solid strength, the way he smelled like rain and leather, and something uniquely him. When Ella's breathing deepened into true sleep, Clara stood to leave. Rowan caught her hand as she passed. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "thank you, for tonight, for everything." His hand was calloused and warm, completely engulfing hers. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're welcome," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. For a long moment they stood like that, hands clasped, eyes locked. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Something was happening, something neither of them had planned for. The careful distance they'd maintained was crumbling, and Clara didn't know whether to be terrified or exhilarated. Then Rowan released her hand and stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Clara," he said, his voice rough. "Good night," Clara replied, and fled to her room before she could do something foolish like tell him that she was starting to care for him, that this marriage of convenience was becoming anything but convenient because her heart refused to follow the rules they'd agreed upon. In her room, Clara pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks and tried to calm her racing pulse. This was dangerous territory. She'd agreed to a marriage without love, without intimacy, without expectations beyond the practical. Getting emotionally entangled would only lead to heartache, especially when Rowan had made it clear his heart belonged to a ghost. But as Clara finally climbed into bed and listened to the last drops of rain against her window, she couldn't deny the truth anymore. She was falling in love with her husband. Slowly, inevitably, impossibly, she was falling in love with Rowan Hale, and she had no idea what to do about it. The realization should have made things awkward between them, but instead it made Clara hyper-aware of everything. She noticed the way Rowan's eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. She felt the electricity when they accidentally touched while passing dishes at dinner. She caught herself smoothing her hair before he came in from the range, choosing her dresses more carefully, laughing more freely at his rare jokes. It was torture and joy in equal measure, and Clara had no one to confide in. She couldn't write to her father about falling for a man who'd explicitly said he didn't want love. She couldn't talk to Mrs. Jensen, who would surely spread it around the ranch. And she certainly couldn't tell Rowan, who would probably retreat even further into his careful distance. So Clara kept her feelings locked away and threw herself into preparing for Christmas. It would be Ella's first Christmas without her parents, and Clara was determined to make it special, to give the child something beautiful to remember instead of just grief. She spent her evening sewing a new dress for Ella, stitching delicate flowers along the hem. She baked cookies in shapes of stars and trees, letting Ella help decorate them with sugar icing. She searched the storage rooms and found boxes of decorations that hadn't been touched since Rowan's wife died. And with Rowan's quiet permission, she began bringing the house to life with pine boughs and ribbons. Rowan watched these preparations with something like wonder. One evening, he found Clara standing on a chair in the parlor, trying to hang a wreath above the fireplace. She was stretched up on her toes, just barely able to reach the hook. "Here," Rowan said, appearing suddenly behind her. "Let me." He reached up easily, his body bracketing hers without quite touching. Clara was intensely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from him, of how easy it would be to lean back against his chest. She held her breath as he secured the wreath, then stepped down from the chair quickly, putting necessary distance between them. "Thank you," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Clara," Rowan said, and something in his tone made her look up. What you're doing for Christmas, for Ella, it's more than I could have hoped for. The house hasn't felt this alive in years." "Everyone deserves a proper Christmas," Clara said softly. "Especially Ella. She's been through so much." "So have you," Rowan pointed out. "You lost your reputation, your place in town, your whole life as you knew it, yet here you are making sure everyone else is happy." Clara felt her cheeks warm under his scrutiny. "I'm happy too," she said quietly, "happier than I expected to be." Are you? Rowan asked, stepping closer. Truly? Because sometimes I wonder if you regret this arrangement. If you wish you'd gone to San Francisco instead, had a real life instead of being trapped here with a stranger and his traumatized niece. Trapped? Clara repeated, stung. Rowan, is that what you think? That I feel trapped? Don't you? No, Clara said firmly. No, I don't. This ranch, this house, Ella, they're not a trap. They're a gift. One I didn't know I needed until I found it. Rowan's gray eyes searched her face, looking for the truth behind her words. Whatever he saw there made something shift in his expression, some wall beginning to crack. Clara, Mama, Uncle Rowan! Ella's excited voice interrupted from the doorway. It's snowing! Come look, it's snowing! The moment shattered. Rowan stepped back and Clara turned away, both of them following Ella to the window where fat white flakes were indeed falling, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. Can we go outside? Ella begged. Please, I want to catch snowflakes. Clara laughed, grateful for the distraction. Get your coat and boots. We'll go for a little while before it gets too cold. They bundled up and ventured out into the falling snow. Ella ran in circles, her face turned up to the sky, her laughter ringing across the courtyard. Clara watched her with such obvious affection that Rowan felt his chest tighten. This was what he'd wanted when he'd proposed this arrangement, someone to love Ella, to give her joy again. But he hadn't anticipated how it would feel to watch Clara with his niece, to see the genuine love between them. And he certainly hadn't anticipated how it would make him feel about Clara herself. She was beautiful in the lamplight, yes, but it was more than that. It was the way she moved through his house as if she'd always belonged there, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she'd transformed not just the physical space, but the very atmosphere of the ranch, bringing warmth and life to places that had been cold and empty. Rowan had loved his first wife deeply. Her death had nearly destroyed him. He'd sworn he'd never open himself to that kind of pain again, had carefully constructed walls around his heart to keep everyone at a safe distance. But Clara was slipping through his defenses without even trying, and it terrified him. Uncle Rowan, Ella called, come play with us. Before Rowan could respond, a snowball hit him square in the chest. He looked up to see Clara with her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with mock innocence. Did you just... Rowan began. I have no idea what you're talking about, Clara said primly, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. Something playful sparked in Rowan's chest, something he hadn't felt in years. He bent down, scooped up snow, and packed it efficiently. Is that so? Clara squealed and ran, but Rowan's aim was true. The snowball caught her shoulder, and suddenly they were all laughing and throwing snow like children, the tension and careful distance forgotten in the simple joy of play. They stayed out until their fingers were numb and Ella's cheeks were bright red from cold. Back inside, Clara made hot chocolate while Rowan built up the fire, and they sat together in the parlor with Ella between them, warming their hands on steaming mugs. This was the best day, Ella said sleepily, leaning against Clara's side. I'm glad, sweetheart, Clara murmured, stroking the child's damp curls. Rowan watched them over the rim of his mug, something shifting irrevocably in his chest. This was his family now, not the family he'd planned, not the one he'd lost, but something new and unexpected and precious and terrifying. The next morning, Rowan announced he needed to check the line shacks in the far pastures, make sure they were stocked and ready in case any of his men got caught in bad weather. It would take 2 days, maybe 3. Clara tried to ignore the disappointment that settled in her stomach. We'll be fine here, she assured him. Be careful. I will. Rowan hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, but then just nodded and left. After he was gone, the house felt emptier somehow. Clara told herself she was being ridiculous. She'd spent most of her life without Rowan Hale and had managed just fine. But somehow, in just 2 months, his presence had become something she looked forward to, relied on even. She distracted herself with Christmas preparations. She and Ella made garlands from pine boughs and berries, baked more cookies than they could possibly eat, and practiced Christmas carols on the piano. Mrs. Jensen stopped by with a basket of preserves and stayed for tea, chatting about ranch gossip and complimenting Clara on how well she'd settled in. You've been good for them, Mrs. Jensen said as she was leaving. Mr. Hale and little Ella both. The house feels alive again. And Mr. Hale, well, he smiles now. Didn't think I'd see that again after Miss Sarah died. After Mrs. Jensen left, Clara stood on the porch watching the winter sun sink toward the horizon, thinking about Sarah Hale, the woman whose place she'd taken, the woman Rowan had loved enough to bury his heart with when she died. "Do you mind?" Clara whispered to the gathering twilight, as if Sarah's spirit might somehow hear. "Do you mind that I'm here, in your house, loving your husband and his niece?" The wind rustled through the bare trees, and a snowflake landed on Clara's cheek like a cold kiss. She took it as a sign. Whether of blessing or warning, she couldn't tell. That night, long after Ella was asleep, Clara couldn't settle. She wandered through the quiet house, eventually finding herself in Rowan's study. She knew she shouldn't be there, but something drew her in. The room smelled like him, leather and tobacco and something indefinably masculine. On the desk was a daguerreotype in a silver frame. Clara picked it up, studying the woman in the image. Sarah Hale had been beautiful, with delicate features and light hair. She looked gentle, refined, everything Clara wasn't. "She was lovely," Clara whispered. "I see why you loved her." "Clara?" Clara spun around, nearly dropping the photograph. Rowan stood in the doorway, covered in snow, his face drawn with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," Clara stammered, setting the picture down quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I couldn't sleep, and I wandered in here without thinking. I'll go—" "The north fence was down," Rowan said, not moving from the doorway. "Took hours to fix in the snow. I just got back." He paused. "You were looking at Sarah." "I'm sorry," Clara said again, feeling like she'd been caught doing something shameful. "I was just curious. She was beautiful." "She was," Rowan agreed, finally entering the room. He picked up the photograph, studying it with an unreadable expression. She was gentle and kind. She loved music and gardening. She died bringing our child into the world, a son who lived only 3 hours. Clara's heart clenched. "Rowan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the baby." "Most people don't." Rowan set the picture down carefully. "I don't talk about it. Losing them both nearly killed me. I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me like that again." "And then you married me," Clara said softly. "And then I married you," Rowan echoed. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara saw confusion and longing and fear warring in his expression. "Clara, this wasn't supposed to happen." "What wasn't?" "This." He gestured vaguely between them. "I was supposed to marry you for practical reasons. You'd care for Ella, I'd protect your reputation, and we'd coexist peacefully. It was supposed to be simple." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "And it's not?" "No," Rowan said roughly. "It's not, because somewhere between the wedding and now you've become—" He broke off, running a hand through his damp hair in frustration. "I don't know how to do this, Clara. I don't know how to let someone in again. I don't know if I even can." Clara took a step toward him, her hands trembling. "What are you saying, Rowan?" "I'm saying that I think about you constantly. I'm saying that I come home early just to see you. I'm saying that watching you with Ella makes me feel things I thought I'd never feel again. And it terrifies me because I won't survive losing someone else I love." The word hung between them like a lightning strike. Love. He'd said love. "Rowan," Clara breathed, closing the distance between them. "You won't lose me." "You can't promise that," Rowan said, but he didn't move away when Clara reached up to touch his face. "No," she agreed. "I can't promise I'll live forever. But I can promise that I'm here now, that I choose to be here, and that what started as a business arrangement has become so much more, at least for me." Rowan's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. "Clara, if we do this, if we make this marriage real, there's no going back. I can't do halfway. I can't give you part of my heart. It's all or nothing." "Then give me all," Clara whispered, "because that's what you have from me. All of it. Everything." For a moment, Rowan just stared at her, as if trying to determine whether she was real. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "I'm afraid," he admitted against her temple. "I'm so damned afraid." "I know," Clara said, wrapping her arms around him. "I am too. But Rowan, being afraid and being in love aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes the things most worth having are the things that scare us most." Rowan pulled back just enough to look at her face. When did you become so wise? Probably around the same time I fell in love with a stubborn cowboy who proposed a marriage of convenience and then proceeded to be the most inconveniently wonderful man I've ever met. A laugh burst from Rowan, a real laugh, unguarded and genuine. Then he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her. It wasn't like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was real and deep and full of all the feelings they'd been holding back. Clara melted into him, her hands fisting in his damp shirt, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this, his mouth on hers, his arms around her, the thundering of their hearts beating in sync. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I've been alone so long, I've forgotten how to be with someone. Then we'll figure it out together, Clara said. We don't have to rush. We can take this as slowly as you need. But Rowan, don't shut me out. Don't retreat because you're scared. Promise me that. I promise, Rowan said. Clara, He stopped, swallowed hard. I love you. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being a convenient solution and became everything. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. I love you too, so much that it terrifies me sometimes. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and Clara felt something fundamental click into place. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just safety or security, but home. True home. In the arms of a man who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. Come on, Rowan said, finally pulling back. You're exhausted and I'm frozen through. We should both get some sleep. He walked her to her bedroom door and Clara hesitated. Rowan? What happens now between us, I mean? Rowan smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Now we figure out how to be married, really married. But Clara, I meant what I said about taking it slow. I want to court you properly, the way I should have before. I want to do this right. We're already married, Clara pointed out, amused. Usually courting comes first. Then we'll do it backward, Rowan said with a shrug. I'm going to court my wife until she knows without a doubt that she's cherished. That sound acceptable to you, Mrs. Hale? Very acceptable, Mr. Hale, Clara replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Rowan kissed her forehead gently. Good night, Clara. Good night. Clara floated into her room, changed into her nightgown, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling with a smile she couldn't suppress. Everything had changed. The careful distance was gone, replaced by something real and precious and fragile. They had a long way to go. Grief didn't disappear overnight, and neither did fear, but they would walk that path together. The next morning, Clara woke to find a single wildflower on her breakfast plate. Absurd in winter, which meant Rowan must have ridden far to find it in some sheltered spot. The gesture was so unexpected and sweet that Clara pressed the flower to her chest, feeling tears prick her eyes. Uncle Rowan picked that for you, Ella said matter-of-factly, munching on toast. He said ladies like flowers. He was right, Clara said, tucking the flower carefully into a small vase. This is very special. Over the following weeks, Rowan courted Clara with the determined focus he brought to everything. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers, a book she'd mentioned wanting, a new shawl when he noticed her old one was threadbare. He asked her to walk with him in the evenings after Ella was in bed, and they'd stroll around the ranch talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, about building the ranch from nothing, about his dreams for the future. Clara shared her own stories, about her mother's death, her father's devotion, the dreams she'd had before the scandal. They talked about Ella, about how to help her continue healing, about whether to send her to school in town or hire a teacher to come to the ranch. And slowly, carefully, the physical distance between them diminished too. Rowan would take Clara's hand as they walked. Clara would kiss his cheek before he left for the day. They'd sit closer at dinner, their shoulders touching, comfortable in each other's presence. But they maintained separate bedrooms, both understanding that despite their declarations, they needed time to build this new foundation properly. Christmas arrived on a clear, cold morning. Ella woke them both before dawn, bouncing with excitement. They gathered in the parlor where a small tree stood, decorated with ornaments and paper chains Ella had made. Under the tree were simple gifts: a doll Clara had sewn for Ella, a new journal and set of pencils for Clara from Rowan, and for Rowan, Clara had knitted a warm scarf in deep blue. But the real gift was the joy on Ella's face as she opened her presents, the way she threw her arms around both Clara and Rowan, declaring it the best Christmas ever. As Clara watched Rowan hug his niece, his eyes meeting hers over Ella's head with such love and gratitude, she felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. They spent the day together, just the three of them, cooking an elaborate dinner and playing games and singing carols around the piano. It was perfect in its simplicity, and as Clara tucked an exhausted Ella into bed that night, she realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not perfect or polished, but real and loving and safe. She found Rowan in the parlor, staring into the fire. When she entered, he held out his arm, and she settled beside him on the sofa, tucking herself against his side. "Thank you," Rowan said quietly, "for today, for Ella, for everything." "Thank you," Clara replied, "for giving me a family when I thought I'd lost everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire crackle, and Clara felt Rowan's lips brush her temple. "I have something for you," he said. "Another gift. I was waiting for the right moment." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and handed it to Clara. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a chain, beautifully engraved with roses. "Rowan, it's beautiful," Clara breathed. "Open it," he urged. Clara did and found two tiny photographs inside, one of Ella and one of Rowan himself, both clearly recent, her vision blurred with tears. "I wanted you to carry us with you," Rowan said softly, "the way we carry you in our hearts. Clara, you came into our lives when we were broken, and you've put us back together. You've made us whole." "You've done the same for me," Clara whispered, closing her hand around the locket. "I was so lost, Rowan. I didn't even realize how lost until I found you." Rowan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Clara, I know we agreed to take things slow, and I want to respect that. But I need you to know I'm yours, completely. This marriage may have started as convenience, but you're my wife in every way that matters. And when you're ready, when we're both ready, I want to make this marriage complete." Clara's breath caught. She knew what he was saying, what he was offering. Not just physical intimacy, but total vulnerability. The complete dismantling of the walls they'd both been hiding behind. "I'm ready," she said, the words coming from somewhere deep and true. "Rowan, I'm ready whenever you are." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Are you sure?" "Because once we cross this threshold, I'm sure," Clara interrupted. "I've never been more sure of anything." Rowan kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Then come with me, wife. Let me show you how much you mean to me." He stood and offered his hand. Clara took it without hesitation, letting him lead her toward his bedroom, toward their future, together at last. As they climbed the stairs, Clara glanced back at the parlor one last time, seeing the Christmas tree with its flickering candles, the decorations she'd hung, the home she'd created from an empty house. She thought about the ruined reputation that had brought her here, about the marriage of convenience that had become anything but convenient. She thought about how sometimes the worst moments of your life could lead you exactly where you needed to be. And as Rowan closed the bedroom door behind them, his eyes full of love and promise, Clara sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had led her to this moment, to this man, this family, this love that had saved them all. The arrangement they'd made had been about survival, about practicality, about solving problems. But what they'd built together was so much more. They'd built a home. They'd built a family. And now, finally, they were building a marriage based not on convenience, but on choice. The best choice Clara had ever made. Clara woke the next morning wrapped in warmth and strength, Rowan's arm draped protectively across her waist. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the curtains, and for a moment she simply lay there, marveling at how different everything felt. The careful distance that had defined their marriage for 3 months was gone, replaced by an intimacy that went far beyond the physical joining of the night before. Rowan stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her watching him, a smile spread across his face, unguarded and boyish in a way she'd never seen before. "Good morning, wife," he murmured, pulling her closer. "Good morning, husband," Claire replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks despite everything they'd shared. Rowan's thumb traced her jaw tenderly. Any regrets? None, Clara said firmly. You? Only that we waited so long, Rowan admitted, though I suppose we needed the time. To build trust. To understand what we were risking. Before Clara could respond, small footsteps thundered down the hallway. Mama, Uncle Rowan, are you awake? Mrs. Jensen brought fresh milk, and I want to make pancakes. Clara and Rowan exchanged amused glances. We should get up, Clara said reluctantly. We should, Rowan agreed, but made no move to release her. Instead, he kissed her forehead, then her nose, then finally her lips. But first I need you to know something. Last night wasn't just about desire, Clara. It was about commitment, about choosing you every day for the rest of my life. Tears pricked Clara's eyes. I choose you too, every day, always. They dressed quickly and emerged to find Ella in the kitchen, already wearing Clara's apron which dragged on the floor, trying to reach the flour tin on the high shelf. Let me help you with that, Clara said, lifting it down. Ella turned, studying them both with knowing eyes that seemed far too old for a 6-year-old. You look happy, she observed. Both of you. We are happy, Rowan confirmed, ruffling her hair. Very happy. As they worked together making breakfast, Ella cracking eggs with fierce concentration, Clara mixing batter, Rowan setting the table, Clara felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. This was her family. These were her people. And for the first time since the scandal destroyed her old life, she felt completely at home in her new one. The winter weeks that followed were among the happiest Clara had ever known. She and Rowan were partners now in every sense, sharing a bed, sharing confidences, sharing dreams for the future. They talked late into the night about expanding the ranch, about teaching Ella to read more advanced books, about maybe, someday, having children of their own. Would you want that? Rowan asked one night, his hand resting on Clara's stomach. More children? Clara covered his hand with hers. Yes, but there's no rush. I'm content with what we have now. Content? Rowan raised an eyebrow. Just content? Blissfully, deliriously content, Clara amended with a laugh. But their happiness was about to be tested in a way none of them expected. It was late February when Rowan came in from the range looking troubled. Clara was teaching Ella her letters at the kitchen table, but she immediately noticed his expression. What's wrong? She asked, standing. Rowan glanced at Ella, clearly not wanting to speak in front of her. Clara understood. Ella, sweetheart, why don't you go practice your writing upstairs? I'll come check on you in a few minutes. After Ella left, Clara turned to Rowan. Tell me. There's talk in town, Rowan said heavily. About you, about us, about how quickly we married after the scandal. Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. What kind of talk? The ugly kind, saying I only married you out of pity, that you trapped me somehow, that our marriage isn't legitimate because it happened so fast. Rowan's jaw clenched. James Porter's been drinking at the saloon, running his mouth, saying he and you were having an affair, that the storm was just an excuse, that maybe Ella isn't even my brother's child but yours from some secret relationship. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. That's insane. Ella's 6 years old. I've only been in Arizona for 3 years and I never. Rowan, you can't possibly believe. Of course I don't believe it, Rowan interrupted fiercely, pulling her into his arms. Not for a second. But Clara, this is spreading. People are talking, and some of my business associates are asking questions. One of them wrote suggesting that if there's any truth to the rumors, it could affect our contracts. So what do we do? Clara asked, her voice muffled against his chest. We face it, Rowan said firmly. We go to town. We show them that our marriage is real and strong and that their gossip can't touch us. But Clara heard the worry beneath his certainty. The ranch was successful, yes, but it relied on reputation and business relationships. If those relationships soured because of scandal, it could cost them everything. I've brought shame on you, Clara whispered, just like I knew I would. I should never have agreed to marry you. I should have gone to San Francisco and let you marry someone respectable. Rowan gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Don't you dare regret us. Clara, You are respectable. You're my wife, the woman I love, the mother Ella needed. Anyone who says otherwise can go to hell." Despite her fear, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "That's very romantic, even with the cursing." "I mean it," Rowan said. "We're going to town tomorrow, Sunday service. We'll walk in there together as a family, and we'll show them exactly what we are. A real marriage, a real family. Let them gossip all they want. They'll see the truth." That night, Clara barely slept. She kept imagining walking into church and seeing the same judgment she'd faced before, but worse now because she'd dragged Rowan and Ella into it. What if people shunned them? What if Ella was hurt by the whispers? But when morning came, Rowan was steadfast. They dressed carefully, Rowan in his Sunday suit, Clara in her best dress, and Ella in the pretty blue frock Clara had made for Christmas. In the wagon, Clara's hands trembled until Rowan covered them with his own. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we face it together." The church was already filling when they arrived. Conversations died as they entered, and Clara felt every eye turned toward them. She held her head high, Rowan's hand firm on the small of her back, Ella walking between them. They made their way to a pew near the front, bold positioning that Clara knew was deliberate. Rowan was making a statement. They had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. Clara could feel the stares burning into her back. She heard whispers, saw heads turning. Beside her, Rowan sat straight and proud, his hand finding hers on the pew between them. On her other side, Ella leaned against her, seeking comfort. Pastor Williams began the service, but Clara barely heard the words. She was too aware of the judgment surrounding them, too focused on maintaining her composure. This was worse than the first scandal because now it wasn't just her reputation at stake. It was Rowan's, Ella's, the ranch's entire future. Then Pastor Williams began speaking about love and grace, about how God saw not the whispers of men, but the truth of hearts. Clara wondered if he knew about the gossip, if this sermon was deliberate. "We are so quick to judge," the pastor said, his voice carrying through the church. "So ready to believe the worst about our neighbors. But Scripture tells us to love one another, to bear one another's burdens. How many of us have failed that calling? How many of us have spread rumors instead of compassion?" Clara felt Rowan's hand tighten on hers. The whispers had stopped. People were actually listening. "I've known Rowan Hale for 15 years, Pastor Williams continued. He's a man of integrity and honor, and I've come to know his wife, Clara, who has shown nothing but kindness and devotion to her family. Yet I hear whispers, ugly rumors that have no basis in truth, and I wonder, what kind of community are we? What kind of Christians?" There was shuffling, uncomfortable coughs. Clara barely dared to breathe. "If you have grievances," Pastor Williams said firmly, "bring them into the light. Speak them aloud now or let them go forever, but I will not allow this church to become a breeding ground for malicious gossip." The silence was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. Then, unexpectedly, Clara's father stood from a pew near the back. She hadn't even known he was there. "I'll speak," Dr. Whitmore said, his voice clear and strong. "I'm Clara's father, and I want everyone here to know that my daughter is one of the finest people I've ever known. She was caught in an innocent situation and condemned without trial. Rowan Hale gave her a chance when no one else would. And from what I've seen visiting the ranch, they've built something beautiful together. Anyone who says otherwise is a liar and a coward." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. Her father walked forward and stood beside their pew, his hand on her shoulder in solidarity. Then Mrs. Jensen stood. "I've worked at the Hale Ranch for 12 years, she said. "I knew Miss Sarah, God rest her soul, and I know Mrs. Clara. She's brought life back to that house and that family. Little Ella was wasting away with grief and Clara saved her. That's what I've seen with my own eyes." One by one, others stood. Ranch hands who worked for Rowan. Women Clara had helped with sick children. The store owner whose daughter Clara had tutored in reading. Even some who'd condemned her before now stood, shamefaced, and spoke of second chances and hasty judgments. But James Porter also stood, his face red and defiant. "This is all very touching," he sneered. "But the fact remains that Clara Whitmore's reputation was ruined. She trapped Rowan Hale into marriage to save herself. And now she's playing the victim again." Rowan was on his feet before Clara could stop him. "Say one more word about my wife," he said, his voice deadly quiet. and we'll settle this outside." "Gentlemen," Pastor Williams interrupted sharply, "this is the house of God. Mr. Porter, you've been asked to provide evidence of your claims or remain silent. Do you have such evidence?" Porter's eyes darted around the church, finding no support. "Everyone knows what happened that night," he muttered. "No," Rowan said. "Everyone thinks they know. But here's the truth. Clara took shelter from a storm. You happened to be there. Nothing happened between you. But you've been spreading lies ever since, probably because she rejected your advances and it wounded your pride." Porter's face went purple. "That's not, isn't it?" Dr. Whitmore interjected. "Because I have a letter from Mrs. Mitchell, the woman whose baby Clara was helping deliver that night. She says you made inappropriate comments to Clara several times before that evening, that Clara asked her husband to have a word with you about your behavior." The murmurs started again, but this time they were directed at Porter, not Clara. He looked around wildly, realizing he'd lost the room. "You've slandered my daughter and my son-in-law long enough," Dr. Whitmore said coldly. "Either apologize now, or I'll ensure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are." Porter stood there, trapped and exposed. Finally, he muttered something that might have been an apology and fled the church. The door slammed behind him, and for a moment, no one moved. Then Pastor Williams cleared his throat. "Well, I believe that settles that. Now where was I? Ah, yes, love and grace." The service continued, and slowly, gradually, the tension eased. When it ended, people approached Clara and Rowan, not to condemn, but to apologize, to welcome Clara properly, to praise Rowan for his loyalty and Clara for her courage. Mrs. Fletcher, who'd been one of Clara's harshest critics in the general store months ago, took Clara's hands with tears in her eyes. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "I let gossip poison my judgment. Can you forgive me?" "Of course," Clara said, though her throat was tight with emotion. As they finally left the church, Ella tugging on both their hands, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. The truth had come out. The lies had been exposed. Their marriage, their family, had been validated in the eyes of the community. "That was terrifying," Clara admitted once they were in the wagon heading home. "That was necessary," Rowan corrected. "And Clara, I'm proud of you. You held your head high even when I know you were scared." "I had you beside me," Clara said simply. "That made all the difference." That evening, after Ella was in bed, Clara and Rowan sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The air was cold but clear, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Your father surprised me today," Rowan said. "Standing up like that." "He surprised me too," Clara admitted. "I didn't even know he was coming to town." "He loves you." And he was right. "You are one of the finest people I've ever known." Rowan turned to face her, his expression serious. "Clara, I need to tell you something. About Sarah." Clara's heart clenched, but she nodded. "All right." "I loved her," Rowan said simply. "I loved her deeply. But I was young when we married, barely 23, and I thought love was enough. I thought if we just loved each other, everything else would work out." "But it didn't?" Clara asked gently. She wanted the city, culture, society, all the things a ranch couldn't provide. She was unhappy here, but she stayed because she loved me. And that love, it wasn't enough to make up for the life she'd given up. Rowan's voice was heavy with old guilt. When she got pregnant, she was terrified. She knew the dangers. And when she died, I blamed myself for bringing her here, for getting her pregnant, for not being enough to make her happy. Clara took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Rowan, you can't blame yourself for the complications of childbirth. That's not—" "I know," Rowan interrupted softly. "Logically, I know. But my heart took longer to understand. And that's why I was so afraid to love again. Not just because I might lose someone, but because I might fail them the way I felt I failed Sarah." "And now?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I know that love isn't just feeling. It's choosing. It's showing up every day. It's building something together even when it's hard." Rowan cupped her face in his hands. "Sarah and I had love, but we didn't have partnership. We didn't have the kind of bond where we could weather anything together. But you and I, Clara, we started with nothing but necessity and built something real, something strong. And that gives me hope that this time love will be enough because it's built on the right foundation." Partnership, Clara said, understanding. Partnership, Rowan confirmed. You're not just my wife, Clara. You're my partner, my equal, my best friend. And that makes all the difference. Clara kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I'm not afraid anymore, he said. That's what you've given me. The courage to love without fear. They sat there under the stars, holding each other, and Clara marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd started as a ruined woman desperate for escape. Now she was a wife, a mother, a partner in building something meaningful. But their trials weren't over yet. 3 weeks later, Rowan came in from checking the cattle looking ashen. Clara knew immediately something was terribly wrong. What is it? She demanded, meeting him at the door. There's sickness among the herd, Rowan said, his voice strained. A bad one. I've lost 20 head already, and it's spreading fast. Clara's stomach dropped. She knew enough about ranching to understand what this meant. If the sickness spread through the entire herd, they could lose everything. The cattle that represented their livelihood, their savings, their future. What kind of sickness? She asked. Jensen thinks it's blackleg. Fatal if it spreads? We need to separate the sick from the healthy, but even then... Rowan trailed off, running a hand over his face. Clara, this could bankrupt us. For a moment, Clara felt panic rise in her throat. Then she squared her shoulders. They were partners. They would face this together. What do you need? She asked. What can I do? I need all the men working round the clock. We have to move the healthy cattle to the far pasture, treat the sick ones, and burn the carcasses of the dead. It's going to be brutal work for the next week at least. Then I'll handle the house. I'll make sure the men are fed. I'll take care of Ella. You focus on saving the herd. Rowan pulled her into a tight embrace. I can't lose this ranch, Clara. It's Ella's inheritance, her security. We won't lose it, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. We'll fight for it. Together. The next week was hell. Rowan was gone from before dawn until after dark, returning exhausted and covered in grime. Clara cooked for 20 men, making huge pots of stew and baking dozens of biscuits. She kept Ella occupied and distracted from the tension. She did laundry and mended clothes and somehow kept the household running while her husband fought to save their livelihood. Every evening, Rowan would collapse into a chair and Clara would bring him food and coffee. He'd eat mechanically, his eyes haunted with worry, then drag himself upstairs to wash and fall into bed. On the 5th night, Clara found him in the barn after everyone else had gone to sleep. He was standing in an empty stall, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Rowan? Clara approached cautiously. He turned and she saw tears tracking through the dirt on his face. We've lost 50 head, he said hoarsely. 50. That's tens of thousands of dollars, Clara, and we still don't know if we've stopped the spread. Clara went to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him while he finally let himself break. This strong man who carried so much weight was crumbling under the burden, and Clara held him through it, murmuring words of comfort and love. We'll survive this, she promised. Even if we lose every cow, we'll survive. We have each other, we have Ella. We'll rebuild if we have to. I failed you, Rowan said brokenly. I promised to provide for you, to give you security, and now... You've given me love, Clara interrupted firmly. You've given me a family and a home and a purpose. Those things don't disappear because of sick cattle. Rowan, listen to me. I didn't marry you for money or security. I married you because I had no other choice, yes, but I stayed because I fell in love with you. With your strength and your kindness and your stubborn determination, that's what matters. Not the size of the herd or the ranch accounts. Rowan held her tighter, his face buried in her hair. I love you so damn much, he whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'll never have to find out, Clara promised. Now come inside, get some sleep. You can't save the ranch if you collapse from exhaustion. She led him back to the house, helped him wash, and held him while he fell into an exhausted sleep. Then Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, praying for a miracle. The miracle came 2 days later in the form of Dr. Whitmore. Clara's father arrived at the ranch with 3 other doctors and a new treatment he'd read about in a medical journal, a vaccine that might stop the spread of blackleg. It's experimental, he admitted as Clara hugged him tightly. but it's shown promise in cattle herds back east. It's worth trying. Rowan, desperate and willing to try anything, agreed immediately. They spent the next 2 days inoculating every healthy animal they could catch. It was grueling, dangerous work. Cattle were large and unpredictable, but slowly, gradually, they saw results. The sickness stopped spreading. No new cattle fell ill. The ones who were already sick either died or recovered, but the epidemic was contained. They'd lost 63 head in total, a devastating blow, but not a fatal one. The ranch would survive. They would rebuild. On the first night after the crisis finally ended, Clara, Rowan, Ella, and Dr. Whitmore sat around the dinner table, exhausted but relieved. Ella had fallen asleep in her chair, her head resting on the table. Rowan looked 10 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. "I can never repay you," Rowan said to Dr. Whitmore. "You saved us." "Your family," Dr. Whitmore replied simply. "This is what family does. Besides, Clara would never forgive me if I let her husband's ranch fail." Clara reached across the table and took both her father's and her husband's hands. "Thank you," she said to her father, "for everything, not just the help with the cattle, but for standing up for me in church, for supporting me through all of this." "You're my daughter," Dr. Whitmore said, his eyes suspiciously bright. "My brilliant, brave, stubborn daughter. I'm proud of the life you've built here, Clara. Your mother would be proud too." That night, after her father had left for town and Ella was properly tucked into bed, Clara and Rowan finally had a moment alone. They stood on the porch in the cool spring night, wrapped in each other's arms. "I meant what I said," Clara whispered, "about rebuilding if we had to, about us being enough." "I know," Rowan replied, "and that's what got me through this. Knowing that even if I lost everything else, I still had you. That's worth more than all the cattle in Arizona." Clara tilted her face up to kiss him, and in that kiss was relief and love and the bone-deep knowledge that they could weather any storm as long as they faced it together. The scandal, the sickness, the struggles, they'd survived it all. And they'd emerged stronger, more united, more certain of what they meant to each other. This was what marriage was supposed to be, Clara thought, as Rowan carried her inside. Not a business arrangement or a convenient solution, but a partnership built on respect and trust and love that grew deeper with every challenge they faced. She'd become a cowboy's wife to save her reputation. But in return, he'd saved her heart. Spring arrived with the gentleness that felt like a blessing after the harsh trials of winter. The garden Clara had rescued came back to life with an explosion of color. Roses climbing the fence, herbs filling the air with their fragrance, vegetables pushing through the rich soil she'd turned and tended. Each morning, she and Ella would walk through it together, the little girl chattering excitedly about which plants had grown overnight. The ranch slowly recovered from the cattle sickness. Rowan worked tirelessly to rebuild the herd, making careful purchases from neighboring ranches and securing contracts for the fall sales. The financial strain was real, but manageable, and Clara found ways to economize without sacrificing the warmth and comfort of their home. But it was the changes in their family that Clara treasured most. Ella had blossomed from a traumatized, silent child into a bright, curious girl full of laughter and questions. She called Clara Mama without hesitation now, and the nightmares that had plagued her for so long had finally stopped. When Clara tucked her in at night, Ella would wrap her small arms around Clara's neck and whisper, "I love you, Mama," with such sincerity it made Clara's heart ache with joy. And Rowan, the man who'd been so closed off, so afraid to love again, had opened himself completely. He was tender and attentive, surprising Clara with small gestures of affection throughout the day. A kiss on her temple as he passed through the kitchen, wildflowers left on her pillow, his hand finding hers under the dinner table. At night, they'd lie tangled together in their shared bed, talking about dreams and fears and the future they were building. It was on a warm evening in late April that Clara realized she needed to tell him something important. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be certain before saying anything. Now, watching him play with Ella in the yard, teaching her to throw a rope, Clara knew it was time. That night, after Ella was asleep, Clara found Rowan in their bedroom, removing his boots. She stood in the doorway, her heart pounding, trying to find the right words. "Rowan," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, his expression shifting to concern. "What's wrong? Are you feeling ill? You've been quiet today." "I'm not ill," Clara said, stepping into the room and closing the door. "At least, not in the way you mean. Rowan, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Rowan went completely still, his eyes locked on hers, and for a terrible moment Clara couldn't read his expression. Then he stood slowly, crossing to her in 3 long strides. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice strange and tight. "You're certain?" "Yes," Clara said. "About 3 months, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Rowan's hands came up to cup her face, and Clara saw his eyes were bright with tears. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know you lost a child before, and Sarah—" "Clara," Rowan interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. But I'm also happier than I've been in my entire life. A baby. Our child." He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "I won't lose you," he said fiercely. "I can't. I won't survive it." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, understanding his fear. "You won't lose me," she promised. "I'm strong, Rowan, and we'll have the best care. My father will make sure of it. This isn't the same as with Sarah. I'm not afraid." "You should be," Rowan said, looking up at her. "Childbirth is dangerous. Women die. Strong women, healthy women. And many, many women survive," Clara said gently, pulling him to his feet. "Rowan, I know you're scared. I know you're... But we can't live our lives afraid of what might happen. We have to trust that we'll be all right, that our family will keep growing, that this baby is a blessing, not a curse." Rowan pulled her into his arms, holding her so carefully, as if she might break. "I love you," he said against her hair. "God, Clara, I love you so much. The thought of anything happening to you—" "Nothing is going to happen to me," Clara said firmly. "Now, are you going to spend the next 6 months terrified, or are you going to help me prepare for our child?" She felt him take a shuddering breath, then slowly relax. "Prepare," he said finally. "We'll prepare. We'll make sure you have everything you need, the best midwife, your father on call, whatever it takes to keep you safe." Over the following weeks, Rowan was almost comically protective. He wouldn't let Clara lift anything heavy, insisted she rest every afternoon, and hovered anxiously whenever she showed the slightest sign of discomfort. Clara found it both endearing and exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she finally told him one afternoon when he'd stopped her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Humor me," Rowan replied, taking the basket from her. "I know I'm being ridiculous, but I can't help it." Clara softened, seeing the genuine fear beneath his overprotectiveness. "I know you're scared, but Rowan, you have to trust that I know my own body. I'll be careful, I promise. But I can't spend the next 6 months sitting still." They compromised. Clara agreed to be more cautious and accept help when offered, and Rowan agreed to stop treating her like she might shatter at any moment. It wasn't perfect, but they were learning to navigate this new challenge together, just as they'd learned to navigate everything else. Telling Ella was its own adventure. They waited until Clara was showing enough that the child would understand what it meant. One evening at dinner, Clara took Ella's hand and placed it on her rounded belly. "Ella, there's someone we want you to meet," Clara said gently. "Well, not meet exactly, not yet, but there's a baby growing in my belly. In a few months, you're going to be a big sister." Ella's eyes went wide as saucers. "A baby? A real baby?" "A real baby," Rowan confirmed, smiling. "What do you think about that?" Ella's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and then pure joy. "I'm going to have a sister or a brother?" "We don't know yet," Clara said. "But either way, you'll be the big sister. That's a very important job." "I'll teach them everything," Ella declared seriously. "How to ride horses and read books and make flower crowns and everything." That night, as Clara tucked Ella into bed, the little girl looked up at her with solemn eyes. "Mama, will you still love me when the baby comes?" Clara's heart clenched. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Ella into her lap. "Ella, listen to me very carefully. I will love you forever and always." Having another baby doesn't mean I'll love you less. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies. My heart is big enough for both of you. Do you understand? Like how Uncle Rowan loves both of us? Ella asked. Exactly like that, Clara confirmed. You'll always be my first baby. My Ella. Nothing will ever change that. Ella seemed satisfied with this answer and snuggled down under her blankets. I'm glad we're a family, Mama, she said sleepily. I'm glad Uncle Rowan brought you home. Me too, sweetheart, Clara whispered. Me too. As summer deepened, Clara's belly grew, and with it, the changes in their lives continued. The ranch prospered, the remaining cattle were healthy, and Rowan made several advantageous sales. Money was still tight after the losses of winter, but they were rebuilding steadily. Clara's father visited regularly, checking on her health and bringing medical supplies. He was thrilled about becoming a grandfather and had already started making plans for the delivery. I want the best midwife in the territory, he told Rowan. Mrs. Crawford from Prescott. She's delivered over 500 babies without a single mother lost. Whatever it costs, Rowan said immediately. I don't care about the expense. But it was Mrs. Jensen who provided the most practical help. She'd had 5 children of her own and knew everything about pregnancy and childbirth. She taught Clara exercises to strengthen her body, showed her how to prepare for nursing, and most importantly, gave her the confidence that she could do this. You're strong as an ox, Mrs. Jensen declared one afternoon, watching Clara work in the garden. You'll have that baby and be back on your feet in no time. Mark my words. Clara hoped she was right. As her due date approached, she felt the physical discomfort of late pregnancy. The backaches, the swollen ankles, the difficulty sleeping. But she also felt a deep, abiding peace. This baby was wanted, loved already by a family that would cherish it. It was a hot August night when the pains started. Clara woke around midnight, feeling the first contraction grip her belly. She lay still, timing them, not wanting to wake Rowan until she was certain. But by 2 a.m, they were coming regular and strong, and she knew it was time. Rowan, she said, shaking his shoulder gently. Rowan, wake up, the baby's coming. He was on his feet instantly, fumbling for the lamp with shaking hands. In the flickering light, Clara saw his face go pale. Now? Are you sure? Should I get your father, Mrs. Crawford? Yes, now, Clara said, trying to smile despite another contraction. Send Jensen for them. And Rowan? Breathe. You need to stay calm for me. But Rowan was anything but calm. He pulled on his clothes with trembling hands, nearly tripping over his own boots. I'll send Jensen right away. I'll wake Mrs. Jensen to stay with you. Clara, are you all right? That looks painful. It is painful, Clara admitted. That's rather the point of labor. Now go. The faster you send for help, the faster I'll have everyone here. After Rowan left, Clara got out of bed and began to pace, remembering Mrs. Jensen's advice that movement could help. Mrs. Jensen arrived within minutes, took one look at Clara, and immediately began preparing the room. How far apart are the pains? She asked, spreading clean sheets on the bed. About 5 minutes, Clara said, gripping the bedpost as another contraction hit. Good, good. We have time. First babies usually take a while. Now, let's get you into a clean nightgown. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Dr. Whitmore arrived as dawn was breaking, bringing Mrs. Crawford, the midwife. They examined Clara and pronounced everything progressing normally, which was both reassuring and frustrating. Normal meant hours more of labor. Rowan was beside himself. He paced outside the bedroom door, occasionally coming in to hold Clara's hand until she squeezed so hard during a contraction that he winced. Finally, Dr. Whitmore gently suggested he might be more useful elsewhere. Go check on Ella, Clara gasped between contractions. Make sure she's not frightened. Rowan found his niece sitting on the stairs, her eyes wide with worry. Is Mama going to die? She asked in a small voice. Rowan's heart nearly stopped. He sat beside her and pulled her close. No, sweetheart. No, she's not going to die. She's having a baby, and that's hard work, but she's strong. Your mama is the strongest person I know. But my other mama died having a baby, Ella whispered. What if... That was different, Rowan said firmly, though his own fears echoed Ella's. Clara has your grandfather here and the best midwife in Arizona. She's going to be fine. We're all going to be fine. He held Ella as much for his own comfort as hers, and together they waited. Mrs. Jensen brought them breakfast that neither could eat. The morning stretched into afternoon, and still they heard Clara's labored breathing and occasional cries of pain from upstairs. Rowan had never felt so helpless in his life. He'd faced down rustlers and storms and sick cattle, but none of that compared to listening to the woman he loved suffer and being unable to do anything to help. Every cry from the bedroom upstairs made him flinch. Every passing hour wound his nerves tighter. "Mr. Hale," Mrs. Jensen said gently, appearing in the doorway, "your wife is asking for you." Rowan took the stairs two at a time. In the bedroom, Clara was propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face flushed with exertion. But when she saw him, she managed a tired smile. "There you are," she said. "I was wondering where you'd gone." Rowan crossed to her side and took her hand, his throat tight. "How are you? What can I do?" "You can tell me a story," Clara said. "Distract me. Mrs. Crawford says we're getting close, but I need something to focus on besides the pain." So Rowan sat beside her and talked. He told her about the first time he'd seen her in Blessing Creek, years before the scandal, walking down the street with her father. How he'd thought she was the prettiest thing he'd ever seen. How he'd been too shy and too aware of the class difference between a doctor's daughter and a rancher's son to ever speak to her. "You noticed me?" Clara asked, surprised, then gasped as another contraction hit. "Of course I noticed you," Rowan said, holding her hand through the pain. "Clara, I noticed you for years. When I heard about the scandal, about how the town had turned on you, I was furious. And when I heard your father was sending you away, I knew I had to do something. Proposing that marriage of convenience wasn't just about helping Ella. It was also about not letting you disappear from my life before I'd even had a chance to know you." Clara stared at him through tear-filled eyes. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was afraid," Rowan admitted. "Afraid you'd think I'd trapped you into marriage for selfish reasons. Afraid you'd never love me back. Afraid of 100 things that seem ridiculous now." "I would have loved you anyway," Clara whispered. "I think I was falling for you from the moment you stood in my father's house and offered me a way out with such dignity and respect." Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and Clara cried out. Mrs. Crawford moved to examine her, then nodded with satisfaction. "It's time," she announced. "The baby's ready. Clara, when the next pain comes, I need you to push." What followed was the hardest thing Clara had ever done. The pain was immense, all-consuming, and there were moments when she thought she couldn't continue. But Rowan stayed beside her, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement, and somewhere in the midst of agony and effort, Clara found the strength to keep going. "One more push," Mrs. Crawford urged. "Come on, Clara, one more." Clara bore down with everything she had, and suddenly there was release and relief, and then, miraculously, a baby's cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Mrs. Crawford announced, holding up a squalling, red-faced infant. "A healthy baby boy." Rowan was openly weeping as the midwife cleaned the baby and placed him in Clara's arms. Clara looked down at her son, their son, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. He was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and perfect. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Rowan leaned over them both, one arm around Clara, one finger tracing their son's tiny hand. When the baby gripped his finger reflexively, Rowan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He's perfect," Rowan said. "Clara, he's absolutely perfect. And you, God, you're amazing. I've never seen anything as incredible as what you just did." "Can Ella come meet him?" Clara asked, already aching to share this moment with their daughter. Dr. Whitmore, who'd been quietly monitoring everything, smiled. "I'll get her." Moments later, Ella burst into the room, her eyes huge with wonder. She approached the bed cautiously, staring at the bundle in Clara's arms. "Ella," Clara said softly, "come meet your brother." Ella climbed carefully onto the bed, and Clara adjusted the blanket so she could see the baby's face. "He's so small," Ella breathed. "Can I touch him?" "Very gently," Clara said. Ella reached out and softly stroked the baby's cheek. The infant turned toward her touch, and Ella's face lit up with pure joy. "He knows me! Mama, he knows me already!" "Of course he does," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "You're his big sister. He's going to love you so much." They stayed like that for a long moment, the four of them together, a family complete at last. Rowan with his arms around Clara, Ella leaning against them both, and the baby nestled safe in his mother's arms. Later, after everyone had left and Ella had been put to bed, Rowan and Clara lay together with their son between them. The baby was sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "What should we name him?" Clara asked softly. Rowan was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was thinking Samuel. After your father, he saved this ranch, and he never gave up on you. It seems fitting." Fresh tears filled Clara's eyes. "Samuel Hale. It's perfect." "Samuel Rowan Hale," Rowan amended, "if that's all right with you." "More than all right," Clara whispered. They watched their son sleep, and Clara thought about the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. A scandal that had destroyed her reputation. A marriage of convenience proposed by a desperate man. Fear and uncertainty and learning to trust. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd gone to San Francisco?" Rowan asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but I can't imagine it anymore. That life feels like it belonged to someone else. This, you, Ella, Samuel, this ranch, this is my real life, the life I was meant to have." "I used to think love was fragile," Rowan said, "something that could break if you held it too tight or let it go too loose. But Clara, what we have is anything but fragile. It's strong. It's weathered scandal and sickness and fear. It's grown deeper with every challenge. That's the kind of love that lasts." "That's the kind of a love worth fighting for," Clara agreed. As the sun set outside their window, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Clara felt a contentment so profound it was almost overwhelming. She'd come to this ranch as a stranger, a woman with a ruined reputation and no prospects. She'd married a man who'd been clear he wanted nothing but a practical arrangement. But they'd built something beautiful from that unlikely beginning. They'd created a family not through blood or obligation, but through choice and commitment and love that grew stronger every day. The seasons continued to turn at the Hale Ranch. Little Samuel grew from a tiny infant into a rambunctious toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Ella became the doting big sister Clara had known she would be, teaching Samuel to make flower crowns and telling him stories about his brave mama who'd come to save them all. The ranch prospered under Rowan's careful management and Clara's steady support. They rebuilt the herd to its former size, and then some. Rowan hired more men, expanded their grazing land, and became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. And through it all, Clara was his partner in every decision, her opinion valued, and her insights sharp. 2 years after Samuel was born, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Rowan handled the news with more grace, though he still hovered protectively. Their daughter, Emma Rose, was born on a crisp October morning, coming into the world with a lusty cry and a head full of auburn curls. "She looks just like you," Rowan said in wonder, holding his daughter for the first time. "She has your stubbornness already," Claire replied with a tired laugh, watching Emma refuse to settle in any position that wasn't exactly what she wanted. The Hale family grew and thrived. Ella started attending school in town, a bright student who made friends easily and brought home glowing reports. Samuel learned to ride almost before he could walk, trailing after his father with determined steps. Emma was the princess of the household, charming everyone with her bright smile and fierce spirit, and Clara and Rowan's love deepened with each passing year. They had their disagreements, their difficult moments, but they'd learned to face everything together. They'd learned that marriage wasn't about never having problems. It was about choosing to solve them as a team. One evening, 5 years after their wedding, Clara and Rowan stood together in the garden she'd rescued from neglect. It had become a tradition. Every anniversary, they'd come here at sunset, to the place where their marriage had truly begun to transform from arrangement to reality. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy in the warm air. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Ella reading to Samuel and Emma, her voice patient as she helped her siblings sound out words. "Remember when you first worked in this garden?" Rowan asked, pulling Clara close. "When it was all weeds and dead plants?" "I remember," Clara said, leaning into his warmth. "I thought if I could save the garden, maybe I could save myself too." You saved all of us, Rowan said. Me, Ella, even this ranch. We were all dying in different ways, and you brought us back to life. We saved each other, Clara corrected. Rowan, you gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me a family when I thought I'd lost everything. You showed me that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us exactly where we need to be. Rowan turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face the way they had on the night he'd first told her he loved her. I went into town today, he said. Ran into James Porter. Clara stiffened. They rarely spoke of the man whose lies had started everything. And? He's leaving, moving to California. But before he left, he stopped me on the street. He apologized, Clara. Really apologized. Said watching us build our life together made him ashamed of what he'd tried to destroy. He said if he'd known how happy we'd be, he never would have spread those lies. Do you believe him? Clara asked. I don't know, Rowan admitted. But I realized I don't care anymore. His lies couldn't touch what we have. Nothing can. Clara, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children, you're everything. Clara reached up to kiss him, putting 5 years of love and gratitude and joy into it. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Clara said, Do you remember what you said when you proposed? That this was a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience. Rowan laughed, that full, unguarded laugh that she'd worked so hard to coax out of him in those early days. I remember, I was such an idiot. No, Clara said gently. You were scared, and so was I. We both needed the safety of calling it convenient because admitting we wanted more was too terrifying. And now? Rowan asked. Now I know the truth, Clara said. There's nothing convenient about love. It's messy and complicated and sometimes frightening, but it's also the most extraordinary thing in the world. I became a cowboy's wife to save my reputation, but Rowan, you saved my heart. You gave me a home and a family and a love that changed everything. Rowan pulled her close, and they stood there in the garden as the sun set, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant colors. Inside the house, their children's laughter rang out. Around them, the ranch they'd built together stretched to the horizon. Happy anniversary, Mrs. Hale, Rowan murmured against her hair. Happy anniversary, Mr. Hale, Clara replied. They stood there until the stars began to emerge. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and built something beautiful from the wreckage of scandal and grief. They'd started with nothing but necessity and fear, but they'd created a life filled with love and laughter and the kind of happiness that comes from choosing each other every single day. Clara had come to this ranch believing she was saving herself from ruin, but the truth was far more beautiful than that. She hadn't saved herself, she'd found herself. In the garden she'd rescued, in the child who'd needed her, in the arms of a man who'd offered her convenience and given her everything. The scandal that had driven her from town had seemed like the end of her life, but it had been the beginning instead, the beginning of everything that mattered. And as Clara and Rowan finally walked back to their house, hand in hand, ready to tuck their children into bed and fall asleep in each other's arms, Clara sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the storm that had changed her life, for the cowboy who'd offered her shelter, and for the love that had grown in the most unexpected place. She'd become a cowboy's wife to protect her good name, but in return, he'd given her a home, a family, and a love that changed everything. And that, Clara knew with absolute certainty, was worth more than all the reputations in the world. This was where she belonged. This was home. And she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here.